All right. Welcome, everybody. Welcome as we start filtering people in here. I believe that we are up and running and just getting everything launched onto Facebook. So if you're watching this on Facebook, or if you're watching this and the replay of this, you know that we're here. We're just getting things going, I guess. But yeah, okay. So welcome to the replay. If you're watching the replay, welcome to the live show. If you're here live with us today, really appreciate everybody who's being here. As always, this is being streamed out to Facebook as well on the Mission Suite Facebook page. So if you are if you have somebody trying to get in touch, or if you just want to have it going on the side for whatever reason, you want two of our voices, you can do that too. We are going to be kicking things off here in just a moment. I'm just getting everything ready to roll on my end, and letting some people filter in here. So with that, I do want to say thank you so much for joining us for today's community table discussion. This is a beginner's guide to collaborative selling, how to get your prospects to buy faster and spend more with less effort. My name is Ian Campbell. I'm the CEO of Mission Suite, and joining me as always today is Dean Isaacs. Dean is the founder of Vantage Group, a business growth strategy firm. He works with B2B companies, helping them grow predictable, profitable revenue and scale their organizations. In 2018, Dean launched the Growth Collaborative, a group consulting and mastermind program that helps B2B consultants and experts break through their revenue ceiling and generate high-ticket clients month after month. I know that we're going to get a lot out of today's conversation, but before we jump in, of course, just to address the housekeeping items, if you have questions throughout the course of this session, just jump into the Q&A feature on your Zoom screen and add your questions into that Q&A feature. Try not to add them to the chat, so that just to make sure that we can kind of keep them all in one place. I think that'll be a lot easier for us to manage. So with that, today, like I mentioned, we are talking about beginner's guide to collaborative selling. This is the kind of general topic of this. Dean and I were talking about this during our last kind of planning session for these community table sessions, and the kind of key takeaway that we came away with when we were discussing collaborative selling is that collaborative selling gets your prospects to buy faster and spend more, and it makes it easier for you to get them to do that. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today. It's a bold claim, I know, but we're going to be talking about why that's true. If you see my screen shaking around, I apologize. I am a little displaced right now. I'm actually coming to you from my parents' house. I'm actually sitting in my old bedroom right now, which is it did not look like this when I was in here. There are a lot more dinosaurs and sports figures, but so I've got this on a little makeshift desk. So if you see my screen shaking around, that's why. So bear with me. I'll try to keep it as gentle as possible. So Dean, before we go too far into the world of collaborative selling, let's set the stage a little bit. I got just a couple questions here. Now, we've talked before about the fact that people have changed the way that they're buying. And right. We've had this conversation. We've talked about this on the community table. But for those of us who haven't been with us before, or just it hasn't landed with yet, can you briefly kind of talk a little bit about that? Why they've changed, how it's changed, and things like that?
Yeah, of course. So this concept of buyers have changed the way they buy. I think it's pretty well publicized, but there's not a lot of data around, well, what's changed, right? What should we do about it? I think there's more content around the marketing side of this versus the selling piece of the equation. So a few things to think about. When I think about the modern buyer, there's been a number of studies with where is a buyer at in their decision-making process, their buyer's journey, when they hit different milestones, right? And especially from a selling perspective, when are they ready to talk to a salesperson? When are they buyer ready, right? Are they ready? They're not just a cold lead that's kicking tires. Actually, they're intending to buy. Well, the truth is that the studies that Harvard Business Review have done and a bunch of other organizations like Forrester, they're showing that buyers are 60 to 70% of the way through their journey. They're buying the decision-making process before they actually even want to talk to a salesperson. That's a long way through the process. So that's a fundamental thing that has changed. And there's impacts to that, right? So one of the impacts is they're self-educated buyers now. Buyers have access to all the information that we as service providers put out there. And so we're giving out all of that good stuff, our white papers, our secrets, our tips, our tricks, what makes us different and unique. And they're taking it in. So they're not only further into the buying journey, they're more self-educated than ever before. And actually what it does, it puts us in a competition with the buyer. In the past, we were in competition with our competition, right? Our competition and us, we rolled up and we gave all of our good stuff to the prospect. We teach them, we consult to them. We're actually in competition now with an empowered buyer for making decisions and how they make decisions. So that's the first thing. I think the other thing is that Marketo did a study recently where they said that all B2B websites that attract leads, those leads that hit your website, the visitors that hit your website, the first time they hit your website, 96% of the time, they're not buyer-ready leads. They're much further or earlier in their decision-making process, their discovery process. And so back in the day, well, we said digital marketing drives leads to your website, then sales takes that lead and closes it. That's not how the continuum works anymore. So those are some things that have changed. And we'll get into this a little further in a minute, but Forrester did a study. I'm all full of studies today. Forrester did a study and they defined the 4 critical pieces of information that buyers want to see during the buyer's journey. And that's changed too. So that's just some headlines of like what's changed. How does a modern buyer react and interact with their market, with their opportunities to work with vendors and solution providers? It's different.
Mm-hmm. So has anybody told salespeople this?
Some of the salespeople I talk to, no, clearly not, right? Clearly not. And that's kind of like the core of a lot of what we're going to talk about today with regard to consultative selling versus collaborative selling. Because if you think about, well, only about 15% of professional sellers use consultative selling correctly. So what about the other 85%? They're either using some other technique, winging it, or figuring it out themselves.
Right.
But yet consultative selling has been the #1 most effective selling approach over the last 50 years. I mean, I did some research. Consultative selling started in the 1970s, 50 years ago. That's a long time. Do you think buyers have changed the way they buy in the last 50 some years? Yeah, probably, right? And so even with all that being said, consultative selling has been the #1 approach, even though it's only used by a small percentage of professional sellers. But what's happened is marketing has moved forward in leaps and bounds, light years in the last 5 years, with all things digital marketing, inbound, social selling, all this stuff. But selling hasn't. Generally speaking, people are still using the same techniques they used 3 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and so on. So it's time to modernize how we sell.
Yeah, for sure.
It really is. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So tell us a little bit about, well, actually, before we go there, do you have any theories or any ideas as to why salespeople haven't changed the way that they've been doing things?
I have a couple of theories. Yeah. So one of them is successful salespeople don't want to change what's made them successful.
Sure.
Right. So maybe they've been able to develop a book of business over time or build a market over time, and that's got them to their level of success, and they don't want to change, or they don't know how to change. So that's one thing. I was talking to a client this morning. Actually, I just got back from a lunch meeting with them, and we were talking about a particular industry that doesn't like to refer their clients to others because they don't want to mess up that book of business, that income stream that they've built over time. And I think there's a level of truth to that. I think the other is that there tends to be a high turnover with salespeople, right? They come in, they do a good job selling themselves into a job, and after 6 months or 12 months they haven't performed, they move on. And so they're not around an environment that builds quality salespeople and modernizes the sales approach. They just churn. If you look at the average salesperson's resume, they change jobs every 12 to 18 months.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So they never land in a place that really helps grow them and mature them. So I think that's it. And the third thing is that there's been so much emphasis on advancing marketing approaches that I think is overshadowed this concept of selling.
Interesting.
So, yeah.
It's funny, you mentioned the longevity of salespeople. I actually had a conversation the other day with somebody who has been selling for the same company for 22 years.
Wow.
And I was blown away. I don't think I've ever seen that. But unless the guys started the company, right? I mean,
yeah, or their name is the same name as the owner, or
yeah, right, exactly.
Yeah,
So
yeah, it's unusual.
Yeah, for sure. And it's interesting that you talk about the fact that so much emphasis is spent on marketing too, because ideally, and this kind of speaks a lot to the disconnect between marketing and sales, because if marketing is giving away all of the consultation before the salesperson ever has a conversation, then they're essentially destroying the salesperson's ability to do his job, while giving them people to go in and stumble around to, right? And so
right.
And that said, the marketing has all gone in a way that you have to give away more information. You have to essentially consult online through sales funnels, video funnels, things like that. So yeah, it's kind of an interesting disparity to kind of to think about. But this collaborative selling thing that we're talking about seems to be more of the way that we should be focusing, because it can bridge that gap.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. We sort of, in a way, created our own monster, right? With all of this content marketing stuff, you've trained the market to want the content, to self-educate, to be further into the buyer's journey before they engage with the salesperson. So now you've created this dilemma. Right. And so I think you're 100% right. And with consultative selling, now I will say this. Here's my caveat for all of what we're going to say. I'm not saying don't be a good consultant during the sales process. I'm not saying don't provide value and insight. You're an expert in solving the problem probably that your prospect has. I'm not saying don't do that. Don't abandon that. Don't abandon that, guys. What I am saying is your approach to providing that information and your approach to collaboration versus consultative selling has changed. And really, if you think about consultative selling, if I really broke it down, I would say that the goal is to be enough of a consultant, provide enough value during the sales process to show enough insight to be considered a thought leader that you can help the prospect agree on a problem that I happen to have a solution to solve, right? That it's a self-serving discovery process. I'm going to ask all the qualifying questions I can to get them to say, yes, I have that problem, and you have that solution. It's a self-serving process to a point. I mean, you want to obviously help the prospect really understand what's going on in their business and all that good stuff. But really, it's discovery, right? There's a discovery phase, which is really our qualifying process. During that process, you provide insight and advice, and you sort of guide the conversation, which then leads you to discovery or discussing a solution. And then we get to sort of suggest our solution, sell our solution. All of that's wrapped up.
I got something. I handle that right here. Yeah?
I just happen to have that in my bag back there, right? So that's the consultative process, right? It's sort of like a sell with, but really to process, right? It's kind of a head-on, a soft, gentle, padded in consulting conversation, sell at process.
Right.
Whereas collaborative is completely different. There's a lot of terms that we may use that are similar, but the reality is collaborative is a side-by-side selling process, okay? One of the things that's evolved with these sort of modern buyers is they don't want to be told what's wrong, and they don't want to be told how to solve it. They want to discover that themselves during the process, okay? If I didn't have access to all the information I have on the web, and I came to you, Ian, and said, I've got to solve my sales management process. I need a tool. what's out there, and I don't know there are great CRMs and I don't know how they work, then you would come to me as the CRM expert and I'd be all ears.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not how your prospects show up, right? Your prospects know there are really good CRMs. They know what they do. They know how they do it. And I've already made the decision I need a CRM, and I probably need one of these few CRMs. So they show up very differently than they did a decade or more ago. So that's why the collaborative process is really important, because if you told your prospect now, you got to buy Mission Suite.
Mm-hmm.
And here's why, because I'm brilliant, we're brilliant, and you should buy us. It doesn't stick, right? They're like, don't tell me what I need to buy.
Right.
I already know. I've looked at these other things and these other solutions.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a big reason why this sort of side-by-side collaborative approach gets the prospect where they need to be and ultimately where you need them to be, almost on their own terms.
Yeah.
That makes sense?
It does. And we've talked about, as an industry, as sales as an industry, we've talked about the fact that people hate to be sold, but they love to buy for decades now, right?
Totally.
I mean,
yeah.
I've been doing this for 20 years, and I heard it from somebody who was 20 years older than I was, right? And, he probably heard it. So why was this ever a thing that we needed to sell to people, right? Like, why? Like, because it seems like the side-by-side thing is more of a natural way to sell anyway.
It is. I think the one of the skills in selling is to help somebody make a decision, because inherently humans don't want to make a mistake. Mm-hmm. Right? And some are driven by the opportunity of gain, but more often we're driven by the other side of that equation, right? The fear factor. What are we going to lose out or not get or whatever? But that decision-making process can be difficult. And when you're overwhelmed with information, you need a salesperson, someone in that role, to help you make a decision. Mm-hmm. So there is that selling thing, but yeah, I have to be ready to buy, to be willing to accept that direction. So that hasn't changed, but just the way we go about it has changed. You have to get them there differently.
Right. So, yes. I mean, so that kind of collaboration really needs a lot of trust and a lot of credibility from the prospect to being kind of giving the prospect giving that to that kind of credit to the salesperson. Yep. Which is not has not been my experience in a lot of times, right? It's not a natural thing, because people know that you're a salesperson and you're here to make money in some way, and oftentimes off the back of me as the client, and I'm just hoping that I'm getting something out of it, right? And of course, it's a crass way of putting it, but I mean that's kind of it's a lot of times that's what a client thinks. Totally. So how can you go about building that level of trust and credibility? Yeah. Well, I think there's a lot of layers to it, but I think the first is to genuinely show up with an intention to serve, mm-hmm. and not to sell. And just by being very intentional about that changes the way you approach the conversation. So, for example, your discovery questions. Can you tell when somebody's asking you qualifying questions that are leading you down a path so they can offer you something? Pretty much, right? It's pretty freaking obvious. But when they ask genuinely insightful questions that have nothing to do with the solution, but really it's a self-discovery process for the buyer, it feels different. And when you go down that path, they start to open up. They start to share more. They share insights. We want insights from a buyer so they become more self-aware versus wanting them to say something that leads me to the next qualifying question. Right, sure. Right. So that, I think that showing up to serve versus sell is a really important thing. And it's maybe subtle, but it's very, very impactful, because if you go into it with that longer term vision, knowing that this path may take you to a point where you say, we're not the fit, mm-hmm. and be okay with that. You'll win a fan, you'll win a friend that could lead to other business down the road, versus the old adage, I want to qualify out as fast as I want to qualify in. That's still true to a point, but then
you haven't built a relationship. You're driving a transaction.
Right. So could you and this might be a challenging thing, but could you give an example of what a discovery question that's intended to serve versus sell might be?
Yeah, focusing on the root cause of the current problem versus the impact and the solution. Right? Good sellers know they want to draw out the financial or pain impact of a current problem, because then you get to build value on top of that.
Sure. Right.
But when you focus on the root cause of the problem, you're focusing on something that can be more substantial to build on. So it's the doctor approach, right?
Right.
We've used the analogy many times. The doctor doesn't say, okay, you got a pain in the arm, here's a pill. They talk about what you've been doing, why it's hurting, what's the background, what's the history, what's the story there, and then they get to diagnosis. But when we ask questions as a salesperson about the problem and the negative impact, we're getting to diagnosis first. So start building on the root cause, and then asking questions around the scenario that it impacts that individual, and how that scenario impacts the organization. Because as a buyer, I care more immediately about how it impacts me. Secondarily, I care about how it impacts the organization. But as a seller, we think the organization has the money to buy my stuff. Let's focus on that big thing.
Right.
So it's much more personal. That direction, kind of like it's feels a little different to the typical qualifying process.
Right. That's interesting. So we're talking. So if I'm looking at an example of like with Mission Suite, and I'm talking to somebody, and I'm saying, so what does it cost you with time, money, or just pain in the rear end to not have your salespeople filling out, or to not have reliable data to work from, blah, 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 that sort of thing. Very much a sales kind of pain, classic sales question.
Yep.
Versus, so why haven't you used a CRM in the past? Why haven't you used something in the past to get to the point where, well, my CEO doesn't think that it's relevant, and my sales, I've never, and as a result, I've never gotten a chance to get I've never been able to get my salespeople on board with it because my CEO just kind of talks poorly about it. That's going to get me to a very different kind of a perspective beforehand, right? And so
absolutely, yeah. Well, and even when you get to that point of understanding that piece, the conversation naturally will evolve into, well, have you looked at other stuff? What other solutions have you looked at? Oh, you looked at this. And then you can be the guide, you can be the CRM expert, and be product agnostic, and genuinely share different options in the marketplace. You can use Excel. Yeah. It's not a good option, but you can keep track of lists in Excel, right? You can use a really expensive enterprise product like a Salesforce. Here are the benefits to that. Here are the negatives to that. Here's the things I've guide them through the landscape of CRMs. Right. Without trying to position your own solution, right? Be genuine there. Ultimately, you're going to get to that point where you're going to get the opportunity to share what's great about your solution, Mission Suite, whatever it is. But that lane, because they expect you to immediately start positioning your thing. Right. And when you don't do that, their guard drops one more degree, and they start to share a little bit more. So that it's a subtle difference, but it's think of yourself as the guide or the expert versus the consultative seller. Right. Okay. So, sorry, what was that? No, go ahead. I was just going to say, so we talked about there are layers and ways that we can kind of do this. So specific to the credibility aspect of this, right? Because when I hear this, I'm like, this is a great idea. I love this. Let's do it. But then I go and try to, if I go and try and collaborate with somebody, they're like, get out of my office, right? I never invited you here. Yeah. So how, what are some of the other things that we can do? Discovery questions, definitely a big thing. And I know we talked about a couple other things in the past. What are some other things that we can do to build that kind of trust, that kind of credibility? Yeah. I think just communicating right up front that while this sounds so cheesy, you're not here to sell them anything.
Mm-hmm.
You're here to guide them through a process, and the decision at the end will be obvious, whatever it is. And being transparent like that also can be weird, but it can also be disarming if you're genuine about it, right? And to be able to show up and say, we're not the fit for everyone.
Yeah.
And I'm happy to walk you through the process, guide you, be with you to kind of go through that discovery. The other element, Ian, that we need to talk about in this is if you're selling into businesses, usually there's more than one person involved in the decision-making process.
Sure.
And the last study, and then I'm full of studies today, said that at least 2.5 people, I don't know how they get to 0.5, but at least 2.5 people are involved in all business buying decisions. And so your champion is the way you've got to look at your point of contact. Think of them as the champion within the organization that is going to carry the flag of making a decision. Okay. They want to be seen as the expert in front of their peers. So if those 2.5 people probably includes one or more people above them in the org chart, right?
Yeah.
They want to be seen as the expert in the organization to their boss, to the CEO. And so part of this alignment and collaboration is educating them along the way so they can be perceived as the expert. That builds credibility within their organization too. So that's really, really important. And thinking about your point of contact no longer as a point of contact, but as the champion, changes your way you approach it. Because ultimately, we have influence over having buyers make buying decisions, but we don't have control.
Yeah.
Right. Salespeople try and take control of the sales process. Forget it. You got no control. You got influence. That's all you got.
Right.
And so arming your buyer, your champion, with the information they need to champion your solution is a very different approach too. Right. I'll give you an example. I was working with a client not too long ago that was selling into a complex environment, and they could never sell to the decision maker. They could never get there. They could only get to like the manager level, but never the VP level. And so what we realized was these manager level individuals became the champion, but they're not good salespeople. They're in this particular case, they are HR people. Right. And so we're relying on an HR person to sell a complex software solution to the boss on our behalf. That's not good, right? And so what we did is we collaborated with these people and helped them build this business case that they knew they needed to effectively communicate upstream. So that collaboration process is all about building the business case, the document that they needed, so they could be perceived as the expert, credible, and ultimately get the product they needed to do their job. So that was where we sort of sat side by side with those individuals versus just trying to, well, let me get in front of your boss, get your boss on the call. Let's get it was never going to happen. Right.
And that's interesting too, because to your point, for so long, it's always been try to get that person on, but collaboration can take a lot of forms based on what situation you're selling into, right?
Yep, exactly. Yeah.
Because that's a very different situation than trying to sell to a small business owner who's the only one that needs to make a decision and just wants input from his staff. It's so I mean that kind of takes it to a very different, it's a very different level doing that. I'm imagining if there are other scenarios that would be even different based on that, where collaboration would look even different based on the scenario of that particular company.
Yeah. The bigger the company, the more decision makers, the more high profile and high cost your solution, the more decision makers, right? If you're selling a solution or a software product that hits, or even a service that's hitting multiple departments, more decision makers. It's more complex. So the model will scale in those complex environments, but it also works with the small business owner that I'm selling directly to Sally. She's the owner, she's the decision maker, she's identified the problem. Then the collaboration looks a little different, right? Because you're not helping them convince somebody else.
Right.
You're working with them to make a very educated decision. And a lot of times, small business owners are busy, and they've done some low-level research, but they relied on a referral to get the introduction. right? So their buyer's journey is different.
Right.
And so knowing your buyer's journey from their perspective aligns this process as well. So if I'm working on that small business owner, they want to just know they're making a good decision for their business and they're not going to waste money, time, and make a mistake. And so you can lean into that collaborative and lean into that consultative process maybe a little more and guide them because you're dealing right with the decision maker.
Right. Right. Very cool.
So, yeah. So the other thing that comes to mind is sort of like, what are we trying to do during the selling process, right? As a seller, we've already talked about you considering yourself the guide of the process, and there's a layer deeper with that, is that many times your buyer hasn't bought your thing before. Right? How many times do people buy software, niche software, professional services, consulting solutions? They don't buy them that often, usually. And so they're not experts in buying your solution, but you're an expert in your market. Right. And so part of being that guide is helping them understand what the buying process looks like. Not what your selling process looks like, but here are the things you, Mr. or Mrs. Buyer, should be thinking about when you go through that process. And if you're clear and transparent that it's not about angling for us, it's really about educating the buyer, that builds tons of credibility right up front. So I think that's important. I think the other is the guide process also should help the buyer understand their situation and their needs at a deeper level. Right?
Dive into that a little bit more.
So when a prospect shows up, assuming they've done their qualifying and they know who you are and what you do, or they've been referred to you, they say, I've got this problem I'm trying to solve. Right? I've got a pain in the arm. I need to have that pain go away.
Right.
Most of the time, they've got a sense of why, but they don't really know why. Or in my world, right, because I deal with all things sales and marketing, a prospect shows up, they think it's a marketing issue. And after we go through this process, this collaboration process, they realize it's actually not a marketing issue, it's a sales issue, or it's a systems issue, or it's a delivery issue. And so helping them understand what the real problem is and what the real root cause is a credibility builder and a relationship builder. Because you may find at the end of it, this client, this prospect needs social media management, making stuff up, right? I don't do social media management, but I know someone that does, and I'm okay with helping them understand their true needs. Okay. Then that third step is getting them to the point where they're confident and clear enough they can communicate back to you what that real problem is. That's the third step, right? It's one thing for me to pitch this great idea and you go, yeah, I get it. And I say that back to me in your own words. And they're like, what? They didn't get it. Right. They need to be so clear that they can state it back in their own words so they really understand what the problem is and what direction they need to go. And I'd layer on one more thing in this. One of the toughest things in a competitive market is to differentiate, right? And we can talk about experience, we can talk about our widgets and our features and all that good stuff. But if you can get a prospect to articulate what I call their non-negotiables, right, you can position yourself with that. So a non-negotiable is, let's say it's a feature of software or an expertise around the consulting services you provide or a delivery method or whatever it is. These are must-have, non-negotiable things that have to be part of the solution. Now, as you go through the collaboration process and you're sharing your wisdom, obviously you want to hedge towards your solution if you're a viable fit. And so as you educate them and they come back to you and say, I've got to have, let's make something up here. Well, I love to use your platform as an example. So let's say, for example, I have to have a way to deliver education content in my platform. I'm buying this software to do marketing automation and some CRM, but I have to have a way to deliver education content to my team. And that's a non-negotiable. It's a must-have. Otherwise, they've got to go buy a learning management system, and they don't want to buy two.
Right.
So as you go through this discovery process and they self-identify all their problems, their needs, and the non-negotiables, and you build this list with them. All right. So Ian, you said your non-negotiables are, you're going to have LMS functionality. You're going to have, I don't know, this green widget and this blue triangle.
Sure.
And they agree to it. It's not about you positioning your own product. It's more really them really helping narrow down their options. Down the road, when you actually have an opportunity to convince them, and they say, well, I'm looking at this, I'm looking at you guys, I'm looking at this other solution. It's really easy to say, that's awesome. I know all about this other solution. They're really good.
Mm-hmm.
How do they handle your LMS needs? And if they do, they'll tell you. If they don't, they're like, oh, well, they don't have LMS. Is that still a non-negotiable?
Mm-hmm.
Well, it is. So you got them to disqualify the competition, but you've built credibility and that information along the way to be able to be in a position to do it. So it's not like they suck, they don't have LMS. Your prospect just self-identified that issue because you've helped them define those non-negotiables. And that comes out of this guiding process.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So you mentioned the Forrester survey study that kind of talked a little bit about how people want to buy and whatnot. And I'm curious about that because that piqued my interest at the beginning. And I feel like we've kind of talked a little bit about this and kind of set it up right. So I'm curious if you can kind of talk a little bit about what some of the discoveries of that specific study were.
Yeah. So I was really curious to see. So the Forrester study was trying to define what are the key types of information a buyer needs to make a buying decision, right? B2B buyers of professional services, products, and so on. And so the 4 general categories that buyers were looking for in terms of information: price. Mm-hmm. No surprise there, right? Right. Sort of technical information. How does the widget work? How does your service work? Technical product or service information. Mm-hmm. 2. 3 is testimonials, reviews, third-party endorsements, expert interviews. That's the 3rd bucket. And the 4th was, I guess I would categorize this 4th one as sort of how-to content, right? How do I go about solving my problem? How do I do this thing? So those are the 4 general buckets: price information, sort of technical product service information, the third-party testimonials, references, all that good stuff, and then the how-to content. What do you think was on the top of that list out of all those? The pricing, technical product. What do you think? Putting you on the spot.
I'm imagining it's the how-to was the most important thing to the buyer. That's what I've seen anyway. People want to know, can I actually do it?
Yeah.
Right.
I would have guessed the same thing, but in actual fact, that was at the bottom of the list.
Really? Okay.
In terms of information that influences a buying decision. That may be where they start. How do I solve this problem? Like Google loves the how-to, sort of like long tail search terms. So it was information they look for, but it was the least influential in making a buying decision. So equal at the top, maybe slightly above the top one would be the testimonials, reviews, third-party endorsements, expert interviews. That was the most influential type of content. Closely behind that was the technical product, how does it work, white papers kind of stuff.
Right.
And then price, and then the how-to. Again, all about influencing the buying decision.
Right.
So if we put that in context with our marketing, especially social media content and a lot of digital content, it's how-to stuff.
Yeah.
Top 3 tips for doing this and how to solve that. So you got to keep the buyer's journey in mind. How-to content is great for capturing attention and getting your market into your sort of like communication sphere. Mm-hmm. But it's not going to drive buying decisions. It's just going to capture attention. Right. So then you have to be very intentional about providing the rest of the information to drive them into the sales funnel. Mm-hmm. So it kind of switches how we think about our marketing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So it did surprise me too.
Yeah. Yeah, because I mean, the social proof obviously is a bit is huge, right? But
Right.
I wouldn't have put it up at the top, I guess.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't have done either. And the
Uh,
other thing that it got me thinking about was this whole, concept that we talk a lot about, which is marketing and sales alignment, right?
uh,
And there's so much misalignment because of lack of this sort of knowledge, right? We know a lot about how to get people's attention. We know how to
mhm,
get them on a list.
yeah,
We don't necessarily know how to move them consistently and quickly through a buying process. That's where the sales and marketing alignment has to happen, because once a prospect has raised their hand in some form or fashion to engage with your brand, right? Download a white paper, have a demo, sit on a sales call, whatever it is. The content strategies kind of falls apart a little bit,
yeah,
because we're like, well, we gave them the great white paper, we gave them the how to fix the problem. I can send them the technical specs, but no, that's not. So we have to get content aligned with the next steps in the buyer's journey, so the salesperson has the right content to move them that one more step down the road. And
right,
so maybe it is that podcast interview that your CEO did on some industry podcast, credibility, talking about the latest innovations within your organization. That's going to move them further down the road. That's going to build credibility for your brand,
mhm,
versus the one more how-to guide on how to solve lead gen.
yeah.
They're already there. They already know that stuff.
At what point you bring up an an interesting thing came to mind when you were talking about this, because there's a shift that needs to happen between kind of company communications and marketing communications that tend to come from, hello at whatever.com, right? And then eventually it's got to shift over to, Ian at whatever.com, or, so on and so forth. So at what point does that shift occur, so that we've built enough credibility for the company, and now we get to start building credibility for ourselves or our salespeople?
Yeah, that's a really interesting. I think it's a tough one to answer, because my my instinct is it should always come from a person and never a hello at.
Right.
Right. Even big corporations should have a person or people behind the brand. So I think that's the case. But what happens is, if I think about my inbox, and it's scary looking some days, with all the pitches, or my LinkedIn inbox with all the pitches, it's a very personalized from Joe at buy my stuff.
Right.
And so you can completely disarm the benefits of a personalized content strategy by selling. The goal here isn't to sell, right? The goal is to engage in a genuine way so you can be a guide. So if you come after it, I've got this guy that keeps hounding me, and if I don't think he's watching today, but if he is, I appreciate your tenacity, but it ain't working. He keeps hounding me on LinkedIn. Every other day I get this direct message. And he called me the other day, and I don't know who it is. It's just a random number on my phone. I'm not answering that. And then he messages me on LinkedIn. He says, hey, this is such and such. I just tried to call you. Selly message.
Right.
That's really personalized. I know him. I have his phone number now.
Right.
It's not going to move me forward. He hasn't done anything to engage with me. So that's a really important part of all marketing and all selling, is just engaging in human dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
People buy from people. And I think that's something that's been around forever. And I think we've forgotten it with all our automation and our efficiency and our AI. We forget it's people buying from people. Mm-hmm. And so if you stop for a second before you leave the voicemail, you ask the sales question, you send the email, just stop for a second and review it. Be empathetic. If you don't feel like that speaks to me as a buyer, don't send it. Don't send it. Do something else.
Right.
Anyway, that's a soapbox for you.
Yeah. So
it's
yeah. So it sounds like, all communicate, like with automation systems now, you can, when someone fills out a form, you can have it assigned to Joe, to John, and Sarah, then Samantha, then so on and so forth, right? And so you can kind of go down that line, then round robin it back to the top.
Yep.
So it sounds like every lead that comes in off of a sales off the website should probably be assigned to be coming from, like, all the communications to be coming from that one person, because then you're building company credibility and individual credibility, so that when it comes time to sit down and collaborate with one another and have these conversations, then it's a lot easier, and a lot of the work's already been done for you.
Yeah, I think so. I do think so. And the further they get into the sales funnel or the buyer's journey, the more personalized and genuine it needs to be. Because I realize, like, lead gen's is a numbers game, right? You got to put a bunch of stuff out there.
Yep.
And I think buyers generally understand that sort of top of funnel, general information, how-to guides are somewhat generic. And they're okay with that. But as soon as they start to interact with your brand, with your organization, the sort of subconscious expectation is it needs to be, I want to talk to a human. I want to interact with a human. So we have to be conscious of that. And then that leads into this whole concept of collaboration and a journey versus consulting through a process to find a solution that I can sell.
Right.
So there are a lot of subtleties here. Another layer in terms of like the discovery process we talked about and the early collaboration is qualifying questions help define the problem, right? I've got to solve this, I've got to solve this, I've got to solve this. But part of this guide to self-discovery is helping the prospect understand the order of priority as well, right? So you got this laundry list of stuff you got to fix. Awesome, get it. It's all important. But what has to be addressed in the next, whatever your world is, 30 days, 60 days, 90 days? What's the number one thing? If you could solve that one thing first, which would it be? Let them go through that discovery process. Go through the list with them. Have banter back and forth. Help them prioritize and number it 1 through 3, 1 through 5. That is a conversation that humans have to help each other. Right. Which is not the same as, all right, you said you got to solve your accounting problem first, your HR problem second, and your CRM third. Well, I can help you with the CRM today. Right, yeah. Right. We completely derail this discovery process because it's selfish. Yeah. Right. And it can't be selfish. Yeah. And I mean, correct me if I spent 17 years as a consultant myself, right? And so what you're describing is what I did as a consultant, right? As somebody who was hired and paid to consult with this person. So it sounds to me, I mean, so I've always maybe inaccurately kind of conflated consulting and consultative selling, saying that is kind of like trying to say economist. I can never do it the right way the first time. But you know, but I mean, what we're talking about is collaborative selling is essentially acting like a paid consultant for, you know, the first 2 or 3 meetings of before you even start to think about selling something. Yeah, to a point, yeah. And I think that's the age-old sort of like challenge with consultants is how much do I give away for free? Yeah. Right. This is free consulting. Blah, 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 blah. Well, too bad, dude. That's the world you live in, right? Right. You have to be able to demonstrate your expertise at some level, otherwise you're not perceived as an expert. Mm-hmm. But I think there's a difference between helping them understand what needs to be done and then shifting over to how it needs to be done. The how is your secret sauce. The what is your guide path, right? We know we've got to solve these problems. You can dangle a few how carrots, but the how is what you get paid to share. I can Google the what I need to do all day long. Yeah. Right. So keep that in mind in terms of your level of detail you provide. And the other part of it is it's okay to say when with a client. Mm-hmm. Right, especially the smaller business owner. Maybe they're more apt to continue to get free consulting, whether they realize it or not. Sure. But as soon as you start to feel that momentum pick up in the relationship, where they keep asking, then you do move them on to the next step in the sales process. It's like, totally, let's get into all that. Here's how I work. Yeah, and just put it out there for them, because by then you've built credibility. Yeah.
And I mean, that's a hugely important point too, right? And because I'm looking at the list of folks that we have on our call here today, and the vast majority of them are consultants, right?
Right.
And I mean, and again, I know I used to, but my kind of go-to line, my little joke that I would tell people when they would ask me questions is, I'll get you to a point where you're paying me. And and the goal was to kind of disarm it a little bit and basically make it okay for them to ask me questions, right? But it is important to remember that there's a point at which you have to say, this is where the line is, and now it's time to start having conversations about engagement, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I think there are lots of subtle hints along the way that will open the door for you to just say, here's how I work.
Yeah, right.
And those are the buying signals, right? To use an old salesy term, buying signals. When they ask, what's your approach to this thing, or how do you work, right? I get that question a lot. Well, how do you work?
Mm-hmm.
How do you engage? I move from selling, guiding, consulting into answering that question.
Yeah.
Because if you keep selling, you can sell yourself out of an opportunity, right? That's just an age-old sales approach.
I back the farm.
Stop selling, start closing, but closing isn't an aggressive, direct thing. It's you're answering that question, moving them to the next step in the process. The other thing I will say is this: it's okay to say no. If you find you're working with a prospect that just keeps coming back for more and more and more free stuff, intentionally or not, and if it's unintentional and you've reminded them, here's how I work, they're probably not the right fit for you.
Right.
Right. It's okay to say, you know what, hopefully our relationship has been of value, you've got some direction, but right. It's time to say when, and be okay with that. Sometimes taking it away gets them to move forward, but that's another whole story.
Right.
But don't be the victim of your own situation. Take control.
Yeah, for sure. And it's so easy to do. It's so easy to do, especially when you're collaborating, when you're trying to be collaborative like that, right? And it's easy to convince yourself that you're just being, you're just showing them how trustworthy you can be, how credible you are, how collaborative you are.
All in the sake of the relationship, for the sake of the relationship.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. And then you can relationship yourself right out of your home, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. It's don't be aware of that.
Right. So there's two last things that I want to kind of two last things I want to kind of bring up real quick, because we got about 7 minutes left here. But the whole buy more or buy faster, spend more idea, right? When we talked about this before, you mentioned that a lot of this is because collaborative selling helps you to better identify ideal clients, and ideal clients buy faster and spend more with you, right?
Yep.
So can you kind of touch on why that's the case? Why this helps you find your ideal clients?
Yeah. Well, I don't know if it helps you find your ideal client. It helps you identify. Right. Because you're with this guiding process, collaborative process, you're answering all of the you're answering all the unasked questions that create fear in the mind of the buyer, the what ifs. Even if they haven't asked it, they're feeling it. And you've uncovered all of that stuff. You've given them a very clear path to making a well-informed decision, whether it's for you or not. That speeds up the buying process every single time.
Yeah.
It also opens up the opportunity for them to spend more because they have a better sense of what they're going to get and the impact of that. And they may not even spend more today. They may spend more in the future. So you may close a $20,000 deal and they come back to you year after year after year, and they become a 6 or 7 figure relationship. That's spending more, right? So I think that's important. That's one of the biggest reasons is just to kind of get through all of that. It removes friction from the decision-making process.
Yeah. Friction
slows stuff down. We can remove friction, speed it up by going through this process. Works really, really well.
Gotcha. It's funny. I was thinking about it. Just remembered one of my kind of big key statements whenever I'm having a conversation with somebody, and I want to make sure that they know that they can trust what I'm saying, is the first thing that I say at the beginning of every call when we're talking about business is, first of all, let me tell you why we're a bad solution for you. Let me tell you why we don't work well for you. And then if those are okay, if you want to keep moving forward, then we will. Right. But I mean, to your point, it kind of removes that friction of, well, wait, what about this? What about this? What about this? What about this? Right.
Yeah.
And so, and there's things that there's things that in every single business and every single industry, you can kind of lead with that. Right.
Yeah. At the end of the day, we are not a fit for everyone, kind of thing.
Right.
It's that whole story, right? And our job is to figure out if we might even be a fit to have a second conversation.
Yeah.
That's the only goal here is, do we want to have a second? If we want to have a second conversation, great. If not, no harm, no foul. And it takes the whole, then they're not being sold. They're doing discovery too. It's okay for them to ask you the tough questions as well.
Right. Exactly. Very cool. So the last thing that I wanted to bring up is something that we talked about during our kind of prep call here. We talked a little bit about the idea of a pre-framing video. And it was something that really intrigued me, and I want to make sure that and it's something that's very tactical that people who are people who are listening to this can utilize in their conversation, in their sales processes. So I want to make sure that we at least that we address that a little bit too.
Yeah, let's hit that, and then I can give you 2 or 3 final tips for collaborative selling as well.
Perfect.
So this concept of pre-framing, I mean, I think we generally know what that term is, right? You say or do something, so it sets the stage for that next conversation, right? So they think about the conversation in a different way. So the pre-framing video is in essence, now it can be a video you send the same video to every prospect, or it could be a custom video depending on your business. But certainly early on, it could be a standard video. And what that video does is it establishes the purpose of the next call. Like we said, looking forward to hopping on a call with you in 3 days, Ian. My number one goal for that call is just to see if we want to have a second conversation. That's it. Come with all your tough questions. Here's some things I'd love for you to think about before we get on a call. And you list them off. It's things you want them to ask you. Homework that they can do. Maybe have them think about the problem they're trying to solve. Make them invest a little bit in the conversation. And on the other side is you get to frame it up, right? We're not a fit for everyone. Here's what we're looking for in a client that we can have the biggest impact on, right? So you're sharing a little of your perspective. It frames it up for them, and it gets them to frame up their thought process for the call too. There's different ways to structure it, but I love doing that kind of thing because what it does is you don't come onto the call like, so we connected a few weeks back, and what's mission switch?
Remind me who you are.
Yeah. You didn't get any, or Dennis connected us a month ago. We finally got a chance to connect. Why did he even do that? What was that all about? That all goes away.
Right.
It all completely goes away. So they're coming in prepared, and they understand the purpose of the call. And the purpose of the call could be a lot of things, but I would like to say, a lot of times I say, if we come out of this knowing we want to have a second conversation, I'm happy.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely. Very cool. All right. And before you jump onto this, Dennis, we have Dennis asked if we've gone more in depth on working with a client on the customer buying journey in a past community table session. We have done that in a couple different ways. If you respond to the email that you got about this call, I'll grab the YouTube link for it and send it over to you. And of course, that goes for anybody on the call. If you want to see some of the past stuff that we've done, it's all on a YouTube playlist inside of the Mission Suite YouTube channel. So I can definitely send that over to you.
Yep.
So now, Dean, you wanted to leave everybody with a few last points.
Yeah. So real quick, collaborative selling. Tip number 1, ask thought-provoking questions that are really designed to help the buyer discover their own needs beyond that surface level that they showed up. That's number 1. It's okay to share your expertise, but do it without any sort of hidden sales pressure, right? There's no inference there. Allow more time for discussion during your calls with your prospect. If you set up 30-minute calls for collaboration, allow an hour,
Right.
allow more frequency, allow more time. So that's another one. Create situations that your prospect wants to bring others onto the call, versus saying, who else is involved in making a decision? Who do I have to sell to? Bring them on the call.
Right.
Establish this sort of mind share, mastermind, collaborative call that will encourage them to bring other people that are involved onto a call. That opens up a lot of opportunity for you. And then the last one is something I mentioned earlier, which is help them develop their list of non-negotiables. You'll very quickly qualify them in, qualify them out, right? You're fit or not. And you get to separate yourself from the competition if there's a competitive environment that you're involved with. So those non-negotiables are really important.
Excellent.
Right.
Excellent. Very cool. Well, thank you so much. Thanks for this has been really great. To all of our attendees, thank you so much for being here. Everybody on Facebook and watching the recording, thank you for doing so as well. If you do have questions, definitely hit us up in the comments of what you're watching. We'll get those answered for you. If you want to see anything, if you want to get anything, excuse me, any specific throwback episodes, we can always get those for you too. We've been doing this for 2 years now.
I know, man, it's crazy.
It's wild. Yeah. So let us know, and we'll look forward to seeing you again next month. We'll see you soon.
All right. Take care, everyone.
Cheers.